these decisions, it's so many factors. It's how much reaction time does the tackler have to do that, all the different movements, the dynamics in a tackle. There are a multitude of factors. So to suggest that we're all going to agree, but the fact is, even if we increased the sanction for foul play to whatever, our concussion rate would not move. Our injury rate would not move.
Welcome to the Players Podcast, where we look at the issues facing players and the game of rugby. This week, ahead of the November internationals, we're diving into one of the biggest and most controversial shake-ups the sport has seen in years, the 20-minute red card. The idea is simple: a player is sent off, can't return, but after 20 minutes a replacement can come on. The aim is to keep the game alive while still punishing foul play, but depending on who you ask, it's either evolution or it avoids accountability. We'll also be talking about the Lions, not just the men's, but now the prospect of the women's Lions series. My name is Owen, and I'm joined by Ep.2 Chief of Rugby Operations Conrad Smith and Head of Women's Rugby Rachael Burford. Conrad, to you first. The 20-minute red has either been discussed or trialled over the last 4 years, and now World Rugby is looking at a potential permanent law change. So just give us a bit of history as to why this is, a controversial talking point in the professional game.
Thanks, Owen. And I think it is important to sort of go back and give context. Like a lot of things, once you sort of understand the context, then maybe the issue isn't quite so controversial. That's certainly the way I see it. But if you sort of go back probably 10 years now within rugby, and there was across all contact sports the issue with concussion, and the realisation that for these contact sports, while you understand they are contact sports and you're going to carry some risk, you want to be sure that you're doing everything possible to make it as safe as possible for the players. So, and I think in that regard, rugby decided that what the sport could do would be to come down a lot harder in terms of sanctioning foul play and removing foul play from the game. Because obviously a lot of concussions were seen as coming from acts of foul play, and that's something you can control. If you get the players, tackling lower, less head highs, less head contact events, less concussions. And so I suppose at law, in terms of rugby law, the 2019, they brought in the high tackle framework, and that was a real shift in terms of starting to see acts, I think, in the game, particularly tackles, that previously were considered accidents or, just rugby acts, and that they were now being sanctioned and seen as the fault of the tackler. And I think prior to 2019, especially, when I started back in the 2000s, if that happened in a game, that's a rugby accident, unfortunate. But that was the shift really came to say, actually, there's a responsibility here on the tackler. You are the one, you're making the tackle, you've got to put yourself in a safer position, and you've got to acknowledge if there's an upright ball carrier, then you've got to do more, lower your body height, avoid that. They talk about sharing airspace with the two heads, so you've got to get your head lower, tackle to the midriff if you can. And what I think all of that shift brought about, firstly it worked. I think it's important to note, like, they have looked at the stats around this over the last, since these laws have been brought in, the behaviour of tacklers has definitely got lower, and I can attest to that. Rach would say the same. Like, the training around tackling absolutely has got a lot better, as it should have. So it's definitely delivered in that regard. But what it's also meant, I think it's fair to say, is there is a lot more grey as between what is considered a red card offence previously, even what's penalised, as to what's let go, as to what is let go, but particularly at that top line, what is a red card and what is a yellow card? There is a grey area, because previously, when you weren't looking so much at the actions of the tackler. You were very much on intention. If it was an intentional act of foul play, so a blatant, if we're just focusing on high tackles, if it was a blatant swinging arm to the head, or the guy's flowing across the, no attempt to get low and took the guy's head off sort of thing, that was your red card. Whereas now, because we were talking about now the responsibility of tacklers, upright tacklers, all these things, you were getting instances where the fault wasn't so clear cut. And what was difficult for the game was that what I saw as a red card, Rach wouldn't see as a red card. And that's tough. And so we've had, Rach and I have had calibration calls World Rugby sets up, and you have a group of people who you would hope would all agree on what should be given in terms of, you've got professional rugby players, you've got referees, you've got coaches, and we still have these meetings where we have instances of foul play and we have video replays, and there is very few instances where all of those people agree on what's a red card and what's a yellow card. So if you go back, this is a long-winded answer, I'm good at these, the answer to the question, the 20-minute red card came about from that they suddenly, people within the game said, this isn't right. We understand the process. We're being harder on tackles, tacklers in particular. That's good for the game, and we don't necessarily want to stop that. But if these decisions are so difficult, should we really have such a drastic consequence for the player that other people would say that's a yellow card? And the referees in the middle were the ones also saying, this is putting a lot of pressure on us, because a red card is changing the game. But it essentially, for me, that this was the key point that bore out the 20-minute red card, is that the fine line between what was now being judged as a yellow card offence and what was a red card offence.
Rachael, you do a lot of work with broadcasters. Isn't this one of the things as well, is that selling the product of rugby? If a player goes off for a traditional red card after 10 minutes, they have to play 14 versus 15 for the next 70 minutes. In professional rugby nowadays, that almost guarantees the team with 15 players the win. And this was something that, from a product point of view, from a broadcast point of view, really needed to be looked at.
Yeah, and I think from a broadcast and from a fan perspective, you often would think and feel, if a team goes down to 14 players, the likelihood of that team winning does go down. It can happen, and it has happened, where those teams do win. However, that probability does go down. And I think you can't underestimate as well, the player load goes up for that team with 14 players who've got to cover the ground more, put a lot more workload in the backfield, those kind of things. So that also has an effect on it. So it is a consequence as well to what the spectators are feeling, the fans are feeling. And again, back to Conrad's point, if the professionals in the game are struggling to identify, was that a red card, was that a yellow card, you can bet that the fans are the same. And they'll be sitting there going, oh, that was a penalty only, or that was, and so that their confusion as well is over it. So it is something that you have to put into consideration as well.
So we're looking at a few examples here, and one of the first is from the Six Nations earlier this year, Ireland versus Wales. Gary Ringrose puts in a tackle. Talk us through this, guys.
Right, so here, a classic example of what we're talking about in terms of a tackle that has drawn a lot of debate, and even you get a lot of, as I said before, coaches, referees that probably differ on the way they see this. I think if you look at it and if you follow the head contact process as we have it, we see head contact. So that's the first question you ask, is there foul play? So again, 10 years ago, you'd say, no, Gary's done nothing wrong. Whereas now, when you look at this, we say the tackler, he was in an upright position. He should have done better. He is the tackler. He has to take responsibility to avoid that type of head contact. He could have got lower or, made a different tackle choice to avoid that head contact. That's a really harsh interpretation of it, but that is the way the game has dealt with this tackle, and a lot, at the moment, that's the way we're seeing it. the third question, the level of danger. Clearly, it's a high level of danger. He's come up at speed. It's clear it's direct contact, head on head. So then we're at a high level of danger. Is there any mitigation? I think this is a key question. Some would see, the footwork of the ball carrier enough to mitigate and lower that down, and then you could give a yellow card. Others, like myself, I'd say, look, I don't think the ball carrier's done anything drastically different here, and it's a tough ask, but on a tackler in that situation, you've got to do better, and the fact that they've clashed heads is primarily the responsibility of the tackler, and so that's why or how you would arrive at a 20-minute red card.
You talked about that grey area. Well, here's one right now where you feel that the player's rushing off the line, which he's got all rights to do. You want to get off the line, you want to close space, you want to take away the time from the attacker, but you've got to then get it technically right. So you can see how some people will say, well, he slipped, so what can he do? He can't do anything. He's slipped on the ground. How's he meant to make a better tackle or a lower tackle when he's falling type thing? So it just shows how challenging these can be for people who see it so differently.
And just how, for a Timo, for all of us, all the factors that come into play, and we're asking even the TMO to make a decision. And I was talking about this the other day. We were talking about the involvement of video replays in sport. All sport are battling with this issue. But you talk about cricket, and the decision is whether the ball's hit the bat, caught behind decision, whether the ball's going to hit the wickets. It's clear, it's decisive, you can see it. In tennis, it's did the ball touch the line? Here and this, these decisions, it's so many factors. It's what did the ball carrier did? How much reaction time does the tackler have to do that? All the different movements, the dynamics in a tackle. There are a multitude of factors. So to suggest that we're all going to agree is an impossible ask, and that's what is seen borne out in these calibration calls where we get groups of experts in. You will never get 100% agreement. We can show a clip like that and what I see and my honest opinion, and I can argue till I'm blue in the face, and what Rach sees can be completely different. And that's just the nature of the game. And I think that plays into the reason why people support a 20-minute red card, because it is just such a tough decision that we're ultimately making.
Rach, is that the best thing about rugby or the worst thing about rugby? The fact that people can't agree on these things and whether they're penalties, reds, yellows, or play on?
But I just would make a comment about, we are asking a hell of a lot of players. Conrad mentioned it there. The margins are so fine. It's an inch here, it's an inch there. It's a split-second decision, a quick change in dynamics. The ball changes in the air. There's so many different factors that go into. There's obviously the permanent red card for those deliberate and intentional and reckless acts. But these are so technical. And, some of them, they do not have the time to adjust or the space to adjust because of the dynamic. And so I think, that's on the reason why, personally, I'm supportive of the 20-minute red card, because we are asking so much of players at times. And when we have these calibration calls, the coaches will say, there's nothing I could coach him differently there to do. And that is the case at times, because the players are in a perfectly legal position to make a contact, but suddenly a change of dynamics or a sudden drop or another player is involved. It completely changed the dynamics and the player can't be at fault.
Let's take another look here at a clip from the Highlanders Blues in Super Rugby. It's one of those ones now that I suppose people go, it's a red, but why is it a straight red and why not just a 20-minute red? Conrad, if you want to take a look at this one.
Yeah, so this is from a clean out, which again has caused a lot of problems. I actually think, as difficult as they are, where the game has got to around high tackles, what constitutes a yellow and a 20-minute red and a permanent red around the tackle, there's a reasonable degree of consistency. The clean out is another level of complexity again. Looking at this clip, though, I think where we've got to around clean-outs to try and provide clarity is identifying actions that we don't want to see in the game. And this here, like with the clean-out, the tucked arm of the cleaner is something, as soon as you give that action, all you're trying to do is use brute force. And if that brute force is making contact with the opponent's head, then that's an action we don't want to see. And so this is where we come down hard. And I think, I was involved in a calibration call around this. I think we almost had unanimous agreement that that is a permanent red card. That's not to say, and this is going back to this point, this is tough on the player, because what's he coached? What's he told? Your job, you're a forward. At that breakdown, you have to get that jackler, that player, out of the way. He's late to the breakdown. He knows he's going to need some force to get the player off. He makes a mistake. That's why he's getting a red card of tucking the arm. But that's something it's got to be taught out of players. And that's, we do still see this in the game. And sometimes they get away with it. It's not always picked up. But in this instance, as I say, if you walk through the head contact process, and I think for good reason here, it's an action we don't want to see, and one where we can give a permanent red card.
But Rachel, to go back to your point, it's that game of inches thing. It's a very narrow margin.
It is, but I think one of the key factors on this one is how he enters this, and he's always illegal. So that gives a referee quite a clear picture on the decision path that they're probably going to go, because we have seen clear outs that have had head contact, but they've entered it legally, but they've slipped up the shoulder or they've gone over the back, for instance. So I think, in this picture, it's so clear and obvious that the shoulder is tucked, and those pictures that Conrad talked about, the palm is facing backwards. That's a motion of tucking your shoulder and leading with your shoulder. And these are the kind of things that we don't want in the game. So we've got to be harsh on them.
Conrad, another factor here, of course, is the bunker and what it does for the game and ties in with the 20-minute red card. Tell us more about the background to that and how it ties in with the referees and match officials making key decisions.
Well, I think one of the developments, and so we've seen, obviously, with this grey area that we talked about, the unfortunate part is that when that grey area often takes time to work through the decision-making process, and when you're involving a TMO and you're then showing multiple replays, how they make that decision is often stopping the game, and for whatever it takes, 4 or 5 minutes in some cases, watching multiple replays of an active foul play, they then reach their decision. The impact on the game itself for the fan, for the broadcaster, for the spectator is not great. And that's a consistent theme of feedback. And so can we get that decision? We want the right decisions, but can we get it in a more punctual manner and not put the fan through endless replays of an active foul play? And particularly where you're then reaching a decision which half the crowd might support and half the crowd doesn't. So you're just building the angst almost around this decision. And so, again, we talked about it in other sports, is can you take that decision-making process off the field? So we saw at the last Men's Rugby World Cup, a foul play review officer brought in. And so if there's an active foul play, you'll see it, you'll still stop the game. But as soon as the on-field referees identify that it meets the yellow card threshold, that's the language that they use, they send it for review. So then the game can carry on. There'll be either the TMO or a foul play review officer will then go through, and they can take their time, because obviously the player has been sent to the bin. You have a longer time period. You're not stopping the game. You're not asking the fans and the supporters to sit through endless replays. That's done in the privacy of the TMO box. They make their decision, feed it back to the on-field referees. I think it's been a great success. The unfortunate thing is that it requires resource. It requires an extra referee that can't be provided at every first-class game. And so this is why we're in this sort of anomaly at the moment, whereas some professional competitions around the world, Super Rugby down here in New Zealand and Australia, they have this bunker system up in the top 14. In France, there's more games played at the same time to provide that sort of resource. That they can't sustain that or do it. So they go with the traditional system where they play the referees. It's all done on field. But it's something I think the game has to address. We can't have different systems in different parts of the world. But it's also, it's a good discussion to think about how we use technology and what's the right way, and what is actually detracting from the game and the experience for the fan.
Rachael, your thoughts on this? Does it make it easier for refs, or is it, a get out of jail free card for a ref who doesn't have to make a tough decision in a big game?
No, I don't think it's a get out free jail card. I think it's an opportunity to make sure the right decision is made and that pressure is relieved from that point of view. I don't think any referee has a issue with making a call on the field, but if they're in a test arena, they know that they need to try and keep the game flowing and that they've got to get to a decision. There may be one angle that they didn't quite see right, or a bit of communication that slightly went wrong, whereas this allows that moment to be able to breathe, to look at all the different angles and get the right outcome, which is what everybody wants in these instances. We talk right at the top about how one decision or one view on something could be a red card and another view on it could be a yellow card. So those discrepancies between the two, this allows for that, to make sure that there's time spent to get the right outcome and the right call.
And I would like to think that the technology's only going to get better and we can actually reach good decisions, not slow the game. Like, there is a consistent theme across all sports when it comes to the involvement of technology, and that is great if it's going to help decision making, but if you're only slowing the game down and creating almost another talking point that's not actually the sport itself, then we don't want it.
Well, it's a great debate, and I'm glad we're talking about it. But just to finish on this, Rachael, overall, is it a good thing for the game? Has it been managed well?
I think it is a good thing for the game. I think we all want, competitive contest, 15 on 15 on the field. And as we talked about earlier, the ask of players, the ask of referees is the demand is getting higher and higher and harder and harder. And I think if this allows for that opportunity for everybody to continue to enjoy the game, I think it's a positive thing. The game has evolved and we've got to keep evolving with it.
Can I make one last point too, Owen, before we move off?
Certainly.
This is, I agree, it's a good debate, and I'm happy that we've sort of centered the debate around what's good for the game and decision making, because unfortunately this always gets taken into a player welfare space, which really frustrates me, to think that the 20-minute red card is somehow softening the stance of rugby, which it couldn't be further from the truth. And the reason I say that, well, there's a couple of things, like it's still a red card for the player and he's still going off, and there is no one in all the world who would suggest that just, it's a 20-minute red card, you're suddenly going to take risks that you wouldn't if it's a permanent red card, which I've heard an argument that's, used by people that clearly aren't involved in the game. But the other thing, and this goes back to the point right at the start, if this all started from injury rates and concussion rates in rugby, our injury rates and concussion rate isn't the result of foul play. We do not have a huge issue with foul play in our game. Of course, the optics of foul play are not good, and as players, we would always support coming down harsh on, high tackles and clean outs at rucks where you're not using your arms. But the fact is, even if we increased the sanction for foul play to whatever, the death penalty, and you eradicated foul play completely from the game, our concussion rate would not move. Our injury rate would not move. Like I've had concussions rates you would have, they would have never been the result of me being tackled high or me trying to tackle someone with a bad head-eye action. They result from playing rugby, and the stats bear this out. So we've just got to be careful. Like this is a good debate to have, but this is not a player welfare debate. We are not going to, as I said before, by even eradicating foul play, and this might be an uncomfortable truth for our game, but we are not going to see a huge reduction in concussions. And that's just because we play a contact sport, and we've got to probably just embrace that. And there are risks with it. And of course, we've got to find ways and make the game safer where we can. But coming harshly and this constant argument that's trolled out, we need to be harsher on foul play to make the game safer. It doesn't wash, but it is something that's really worthwhile bearing in mind, I think, when you have this debate.
Oh, certainly we'll absolutely have a debate on player load guidelines in another episode, but we leave the 20-minute red card there for now. Let's take a quick break. Okay, well, with the continued success and popularity of the British and Irish Lions in the men's game, the women's Lions have been formally established as the female counterpart, combining players eligible from England, Wales, Ireland and Scotland, and set to kick off with a trip to New Zealand to play the Black Ferns in September 2027. Very exciting stuff. Rachel, can you give us a bit more background on this? I know you've been involved.
So it goes back quite a way, actually. I think it was probably about 10 years ago. I actually had a corridor conversation with Ben Cavery, and he was saying we must get a women's Lions. And then it was in 2021 that when they secured or started working with Royal London, they decided to do a really robust and long feasible study to look at all of those elements. Like, is this going to be something that we can explore and that it will be successful? And they had really strong kind of engagement from all different stakeholders, the unions that would be involved, the players, World Rugby, broadcast, and partners also, to kind of look at the financials, look at the branding, look at logistics, hosting, scheduling, how does it look? And the findings came back really positive, and it was kind of, okay, well, let's move on to the next stage now and start looking at where could we host this? What could the structure look like? What's the timing in the calendar that allows us to? And things are moving very quickly. There's now a Women's Lions Committee that, again, is got a lot of stakeholders involved in it. So IRPA are part of that discussion, the unions, a couple of the leagues that it could potentially impact as well, to kind of get through all of that detail and understanding around what this Women's Lions is going to look like. It's hugely exciting, really exciting, as a player who's grown up loving the Lions, watching the Lions, and to be honest, never thought about there being a Women's Lions until it started to get thrown around 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's a real thing.
So that's great news, Rachel. What about the feasibility study from a commercial point of view? Will this work financially?
Well, the findings came back that it can do. They believe that it's not just important for the women's, but it's important for the British and Irish Lions brand altogether for sustainability moving forward. So the findings came back in a positive light, and I think had they not, then we may not be talking about a tour in 2027. It may have been, maybe it wasn't quite ready for now, but it potentially in another 4 years' time. So I think the findings have been the proof that everybody wanted. Everyone thought, the Women's Lions, of course, it can be a success. The idea of bringing 4 unions together to go and travel somewhere to play in opposition, the prospect of that, everybody kind of expected it to come back well, and thankfully it did.
I think the interest in New Zealand itself, I know we talked last show about the women's game not always piggybacking off the men's, and so there might be that initial perception, why are they just doing something because it worked in the men's? But I do think this the advantage is it provides content. You know, we talked about the women's game needing something else. Like we have these World Cups. We've had 2 World Cups have been, you know, the last 2 in particular have been amazing successes. This does, to me, offer something that, and it remains to be seen whether it captures the imagination of New Zealanders, but it definitely has that potential. And I think that will obviously come down to a number of things, but the competitiveness of the matches, I think, and I'd like to think, the New Zealand team and the Black Ferns will be in a really good place in a couple of years when the team arrives. I think, you know, that the schedule will be important. I know they're still deciding on a couple of the games within that, and so hopefully then you see it as a variation from the men. So it's not just a women's version of what the Lions tour are like. It's got to be something different, something unique, but it can do that. I do think the potential is there for it to be you know, a really exciting tour, and we've seen this. I know, you know, being here in New Zealand, the announcement of the New Zealand tour to South Africa, so that's in the men's obviously happening next year, has been really well received, because it's almost as if rugby is understanding what's special about rugby. Like I know it happens in some other sports, but in rugby touring, even having done it myself, it is a really special part of the game, and actually playing domestic games within the international matches, it's pretty cool. You know, that's what fans want to see, and that's what broadcasters want to show the world. And I think that Lions tour is that opportunity for the women's game to sort of capture that unique part of rugby as well.
Rachel, if the Lions was played tomorrow, it would probably be an all-English team, such is the strength of the English women's team, and especially after the recent World Cup. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
There is a significant amount of talent within all of the 4 unions, and sometimes when you're in a different environment with different people around you, you get the best out of people. But I think what Royal London and the Lions have done really well is they've got a levelling up the playing field fund from Royal London, which invests back into every single union over 3 years to try and uplift those programs, the players, the coaches, everybody that's going to be involved, so that it's providing greater opportunities for those players, so that there will be more opportunities for players. But I think, you know, as I mentioned, there are talented players across all 4 unions, and it's not like we haven't seen a men's Lions tour that's heavily Irish or heavily Welsh. And you know, at that time, if you're the best player, you're the best player, and you go. I don't think we're worried about what particular union will make up that squad. If you're the best player and you've been selected to go into that tour, then we all get behind that as the 4 unions.
I think they've identified that they just need more rugby in the women's game, which is a interesting irony when what we talk about in the men's game. But I think that challenge will be huge motivation. And look, there's a lot of time to go before this tour takes place, which I think will benefit the team down here. And so I think with the domestic competition slowly developing, I think there'll be talent unearthed without a doubt in the time from now until the tour, and that will allow it to be a great spectacle. Because like I said before, the reality of sport is that the success of it will depend on the competitiveness, and on, you know, I do think it will be a really competitive series. I think with the Black Ferns will have a fair bit of work to do to make sure that happens, but yeah, I can see that happening in the time that's between now and then.
And word to you, Rach. This is exciting times for the women's game, really, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah, I definitely think it is. I think, you know, as players, you're always reaching, hoping for the next thing, and looking, you know, no matter what you achieve or what you're doing, you're always kind of looking over that hill. What else can I do? Whether that's go and win another World Cup, or how do I better myself? And for the opportunity for the Lions to be dangling now 4 female players, you know, not just of this generation, but hopefully for futures to come. Royal London also doing a lot of work within the grassroots as well. So it's trying to inspire younger generations to understand the Lions, get behind the culture of the Lions, because it's so rich in history for the men's, isn't it? And we've got to build our own story and build our own narrative. And I think it's a hugely exciting opportunity.
Good stuff. Well, my thanks to Rachael in London and Conrad in New Zealand. That is the Players Podcast. Remember to follow us on social and check us out on rugbyplayers.org. We'll be back very soon. Stay tuned.